In this edition of Locked On Capitals, Ben Raby from the Caps This Morning podcast and Caps Radio joins us. We'll talk to him next on this edition of Locked On Capitals.
You're Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. And when you're on YouTube, make sure and hit that subscribe button. And if you like the videos, give it a thumbs up or leave some comments. It really helps grow the channel. My name is Dan Holman. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we are joined by Ben Raby of the Caps This Morning podcast and Caps Radio as we talk about this Capitals season so far. There's been some highs. There's been some lows. We'll talk about Alex Ovechkin's goal chase. We'll talk about Wilson and Backstrom returning. We'll talk about all of that and much, much more next with Ben Raby on Locked On Capitals. All right, in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we have Ben Raby joining the show. Ben is on the Caps This Morning podcast and, of course, Caps Radio. So, Ben, the Capitals did not get the result they were looking for against this young and upcoming Buffalo Sabres team. But my assessment on it, just as an NHL fan in general, is Tage Thompson is one heck of a player.
Yeah, no, he came as advertised, Dan, and appreciate being on the show today. But Tage Thompson, this is a superstar, not on the way. He's arrived. 38 goals a year ago for the Sabres. He's a big boy. He's hard to miss. 6'6", 220 pounds, and he was a difference maker last night with the hat trick and the eventual overtime winner for the Sabres. And a Sabres team that, as you know, is looking to turn the corner and get back on track after some very lean years in Western New York. Here's a guy in Tage Thompson who's certainly set up to emerge as the face of that franchise, a top-line center, and again, a big boy, a rising star, and an American to boot as an Arizona native. So not only Austin Matthews coming from the desert, but Tage Thompson as well. They're producing terrific goal scorers from out there, and Thompson put on a show last night, no question.
Kind of the funny thing is the Buffalo Sabres historically haven't been that great of a team for quite some time, but it seems like their misfortune over the last several years here has kind of worked out well for them, where they have draft picks and they've made some good trades and that kind of thing. I do think that the arrow's kind of pointing up for the Sabres team, so it was tough for the Capitals to take them on. When I saw that game, I thought, I bet you this is going to be an easy game. The Sabres aren't that great, but they proved a lot of people wrong last night.
No, and they're a good team. They're on the outside of a playoff position right now, but they're trending in the right direction. They were coming off a very strong December, not unlike the Capitals, but Buffalo an 8-2-1 record in December, the highest scoring team over the course of the first half of the season league-wide, and they have some high-octane offense. And to your point about a team trending in the right direction, again, it's been a very rough decade plus in Buffalo, the longest active playoff drought going back to 2011. But they finally do seem to have a strong nucleus there, guys who want to be in Buffalo, which is a big thing. Of course, there were several players over the course of the past few years, Jack Eichel chief among them, who wanted out. It wasn't necessarily the right fit for them. They had a lot of turnover with coaches and GMs and in goal. And, right now, again, you look at the point two with Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power, a couple of number one picks. They're set up for long-term success. Is it their time right now? They might still be on the outside of a playoff position come springtime, but certainly their time is coming. They're really trending in the right direction. A very easy watch, Dan. Again, a high-octane offense. They could scoot. They move well in transition. It's a very appealing team as far as one of those who are on the outside trying to crack the top eight.
And, the good thing about this Capitals team right now is they have that tenacity. They have that pushback. In the post-game interviews, everyone summarized the game as the Caps being inconsistent, but I'm not going to be too hard on them. If this was the Capitals from October, November, I think they would have folded and maybe wouldn't have scored a goal, period. But this team is going in the right direction. Just a real pleasant surprise. In the beginning of the season, everyone panned this team as this geriatric team, a team that's past its prime, but they are proving a lot of people in the NHL wrong by what they're doing as of late, and they're doing it even with the myriad of injuries facing this team. You know, one of the funny things that I talk about on this show is think about how great this team is right now. Think about how great they will be once Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom returns.
Yeah, exactly. They've shown a lot of character, if you want to use that word, over the course of the past few weeks, really turning their season around, going back to November 23rd, the night before Thanksgiving. So about 20 games ago, 14 3-3 record over that 20 game stretch. And they've done it with some secondary scoring. They've done it with some solid defensive play. I think that's really been a key storyline. Maybe it got away from them a little bit last night against Buffalo.
Yeah. We lost your feed there for a minute, Ben, but we're talking about...
So they've gotten contributions, throughout the lineup, especially when you consider what's been missing. And, again, I keep coming back to the fact defensively, that's really...
Yeah. All right, you're kind of breaking up there a little bit, Ben, but another pleasant surprise in the game is Sonny Milano, and not just in this game in particular, but a really solid acquisition that the Capitals made. They picked him up off a PTO from the Calgary Flames. The first goal of the game was that breakaway goal, that backhand goal. And then the second goal was the one where he shot it at the Buffalo's netminder and it bounced off, and Dowd shot it in. But Sonny Milano, just talk about, Brian McClellan going out there and getting someone on a cheap deal, and just really helping this Capitals team without a big impact financially speaking.
Yeah, and it follows the trend, Dan, going back years ago, thinking to the Stanley Cup run, and you had quote-unquote bottom six forwards like Brett Connolly and Devontae Smith-Pelly, who cracked the Caps team that year on a PTO. Brian McClellan has shown a very strong knack for picking up players who have maybe had a few other opportunities earlier in their NHL careers, didn't necessarily work out, and you're able to find guys, we term them as reclamation projects, guys looking to maybe revive their careers, guys who came into the league with high potential. Connolly was a first-round pick. Sonny Milano was a first-round pick in 2014 with the Columbus Blue Jackets, having now bounced around a little bit, but has seemingly found a home here in Washington. He too, you talk about the wheels, you talk about the shot. He has come as advertised, bringing a spark to the top six when maybe they needed a little bit of an offensive spark when you consider the headliners who haven't been available. That being said, it's a good problem to have, but now there will be decisions to be made when you do get Tom Wilson back, when you get Backstrom back, as you start to get healthier here. There are guys literally fighting for their jobs, fighting for their places in the lineup to stay in the top 12, if you will, to remain a regular in the lineup. And Sonny Milano, it'll be interesting to see now as players return. Can he be trusted in different situations if he goes down lower on the depth chart? Can he be trusted in defensive situations, the 200-foot game? The offensive side is clearly there. It'll be interesting to see now where he fits as players return from injury. But that being said, he has certainly shown himself very well over the course of these past couple of months, especially when you consider where he was in October, that being not in the NHL after being unable to take advantage of a PTO with Calgary going back to September, early October.
So that's the next question, is that when Wilson comes back and once Backstrom comes back, who ultimately leaves the lineup? It's kind of been my thought that, I get asked that quite a bit on Twitter, and I would say Nicholas Aube-Kubel and probably like Joe Snively, something like that. What are your thoughts about who comes out of the lineup once those two players return?
Well, look, if you look at the playing time, you look at the way it's been distributed over the past few weeks, we haven't seen a whole lot of Joe Snively, just the one cameo appearance against the Montreal Canadiens. He does have a one-way NHL contract, which would mean he would have to clear waivers if he gets reassigned to AHL Hershey. Again, given that lack of playing time this year, Would a team take a flyer on him? I'm not certain, but perhaps his route is to get more playing time, to get reassigned to AHL Hershey. Again, we're looking ahead for the eventual returns here of Wilson and Backstrom. The other thing worth noting, and it's odd saying this because he's been a fixture in the lineup this year, is Alexei Protas. And I think it's worth noting Protas just because, again, when you talk about waiver exempt and waiver eligibility, he could go down to Hershey and there's no cost to the to the Capitals other than losing, again, what has been a fixture and a key cog, playing primarily on that shutdown line with Hathaway and Dowd. So I think the Protas situation is interesting just in terms of it is an option where it won't necessarily, you don't risk losing a player organizationally. He'll still be around, but it'll be interesting to see how much they value, again, the presence that he's.
All right, so after the break, we will continue to talk to Ben Raby. We will talk about how the Capitals' goaltending is keeping the Caps in these games, and then we will talk about Alex Ovechkin's continued goal chase. We'll talk about that next. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup, we've got it all at BetOnline. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. And guys, even if you're not into betting, you could bet on an upcoming Capitals game. It makes watching the games that much more exciting. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen every day. Make sure and check out Locked On NHL Prospects, your daily podcast covering the next generation of hockey superstars leading up to the NHL draft, plus NHL draft rankings and top prospect comparisons for every team. Locked On NHL Prospects, available on YouTube and wherever you find your podcasts.
He's provided in the lineup so far this season.
Yeah, and it's one of those tough things because Alexei played so well in the preseason. That's why he didn't get set down. I don't think the Capitals initially had him planned to be on the big team, but that's just what happened just based on the play that he had out on the ice. But he kind of really hasn't lived up to potential as far as what I've noticed out on the ice. So like you were saying, there's an option for him to go down to Hershey if that's what the case may be. Maybe a bit of a blow to the ego for him a little bit, but they're professional hockey players. They're used to it. So one of the other things here, a pleasant surprise, and I spoke to you about this the other time that you were on the show, is the inconsistency that was on the Capitals in net last year seems to have been rectified this season. They went out and picked up Darcy Kemper and Charlie Lindgren. Charlie Lindgren, who was one of the first stars of the week earlier in December. Wow, when that happened, who saw that coming? I mean, Darcy Kemper, of course, came off a Stanley Cup winning team, but to have Charlie Lindgren, kind of an unknown commodity in the NHL, come in and just really play better than a lot of teams' number one netminder.
Yeah, Dan, I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that Lindgren is partly, if not largely, responsible for saving the Capitals season when you consider where they were late November, early December, on the outside of a playoff position. They had that difficult stretch on the schedule, 8 of 9 on the road. They were going out west, the Pacific Northwest, and going into some tough environments, Calgary, Seattle among them, Edmonton. And when you think about the Capitals losing Darcy Kemper on December 3rd in Calgary, when you think about the Capitals as banged up as they were, as much as they had battled inconsistency over the first couple of months of the season, Dan, it could have gone off the rails. And there are several reasons why it turned around. We referenced moments ago the strong defensive play, the team defensive play. Ovechkin, terrific in December. That goes without saying. They were getting secondary contributions. But then you look at Charlie Lindgren, a career backup, his first time he's had a one-way NHL deal here. And he comes in, he's a prototypical backup, typically playing once a week, once every 10 days. And he gets thrust into starter duty. He made 8 consecutive starts at one point in December. and just terrific. You referenced the week he was named first star of the week league-wide, and the numbers that he ultimately put up, I think dating back to December 5th, which was his first start after Kemper's injury, a 9-1 record, a 1.90 goals against average, 934 save percentage in his last 10 starts of the month of December. Just terrific. And think about it, the one loss was the 2-1 loss to the Dallas Stars. The eventual game winner there was a fluky goal. I think it was a Colin Miller shot that went off of Lars Eller's behind and snuck its way past Charlie Lindgren. I mean, he did not have a bad game all month. And I think the big thing too, Dan, when you talk about the goaltending, be it Kemper or Lindgren over the course of the first half of the season, is numbers aside, I think a big difference compared to a year ago is kind of the when and the how goals are scored. And what I mean by that is what we found over the previous few years with the young tandem is, while their numbers were okay, it was the types of goals that were allowed. Maybe a soft goal late in a period, maybe a soft goal, the first shift after the Capitals had scored, like momentum changing situations in games. And there have been several instances this year where we have caught ourselves with Kemper or Lindgren, maybe early in a game, maybe late first period, early second period, where it's a 1-goal game and eventually the Capitals win in blowout fashion, but they make big saves that, maybe get lost in the shuffle in an eventual blowout win, but they're making big saves at key times. And I think when the saves are made, how they're made, like there's a lot of context that goes beyond just the numbers. And what I'm getting at, I'm rambling here, but the context in which Lindgren and Kemper have stepped up this year in individual games, I think is very significant. And real quick, final thing on that, I'll give a real quick example. Even on Saturday, New Year's Eve against the Canadiens. Okay, the Capitals won that game 9-2. Okay, you talk about a blowout. It was 9-2. Ovechkin gets the headlines, the hat trick, etc. All the goals. It was great fun. In the second period, okay, the Capitals had a 4-2 lead. So it's a 2-goal game. They had a 4-2 lead, and they were on the power play. And Jake Evans for Montreal had a breakaway opportunity, shorthanded. And Lindgren made a big stop. It would have been a shorthanded goal for Montreal. It would have pulled the Canadiens within 1. Instead, Lindgren makes the save. And later on that same power play, less than a minute later at the other end of the ice, Dylan Strome scores a power play goal to give the Capitals a 5-2 lead en route to the eventual 9-2 win. So that's what I'm talking about a key save at a key moment. Maybe it gets lost in the shuffle in a game where they ultimately win by 7 goals. But Lindgren has done, and Kemper too, they've both done really well and making big saves at opportune times, and conversely not allowing too many of those otherwise deflating goals that could really be backbreakers.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm talking about, and we're talking about here is the consistency. Such a refreshing feeling to know that, if it's Kemper, if it's Lindgren in net, there's a pretty good chance the Capitals will win a game, and that's, a positive improvement over last year. This team has really turned it around in the month of December. Some people pointed to the fact that Peter Laviolette had a meeting with the players and kind of was holding the players more accountable. What is it for you? What was the impetus that changed this Capitals team to go in the right direction and start winning games? They did it despite, like we talked about off the top, missing a myriad of different players. TJ Oshie kind of been in and out of the lineup. There's, a good argument that he really helps push this Capitals team in the right direction. What was it for you that changed everything, that turned this Capitals team, which was, a second round wild card at best, to being kind of a contender in the Metro now?
Well, I think the eye test points to the defensive play, and the numbers actually support that too. Again, going back their last 20 games, at least entering play last night. These numbers may have changed since last night with the 5-4 overtime loss to Buffalo, but entering last night, they had a 2.16 goals against average dating back to November 23rd, Thanksgiving Eve, so about 19, 20 games ago. And the defensive commitment and the buy-in, we spoke to TJ Oshie yesterday before he made his return and asked him, what that very question, what's been the difference? Well, what's changed over the course of the past few weeks? And he suggested that the defensive play, the quote-unquote 5-man unit, the buy-in structurally, kind of all those cliches you might hear, but he suggested, and we've observed the same thing, the defensive play has really been good. There haven't been too many odd man rushes against, too many grade A scoring chances against. They've really done a good job. The forwards back checking, tracking back. Oshie suggested the way they're playing defensively, it's almost like what you'd come to expect to see in the playoffs when teams really clamp down. And to me, that's very encouraging because the way they're playing stylistically, structurally, the buy-in, the commitment, you wonder if the way they've played over the past few weeks, is it sustainable? Look, maybe they're not going to go 14-3-3 over the course of every 20-game stretch now, but the way they're playing, it is the type of hockey. It bodes well for the second half of the season and come springtime. They've kind of laid the foundation. They have the blueprint now for how they ought to be playing as they look to realize their potential goals in the second half and into the postseason. And it's interesting because I think that the part of it is because they looked around the room and there was a recognition. All right, we're missing several headliners. We're going to have to grind out some wins here. And yes, there have been a few blowouts sprinkled in, but I think there was a recognition late November, early December. If they didn't want the season to go off the rails, to continue trending in the right direction, they were going to have to clean things up. And certainly a defensive-minded mentality, that goes a long way. And again, maybe slowing down some stronger teams and, grinding out some wins and giving yourself the opportunity to come away with victories, thinking back to a win over Edmonton, for example, in early December, talking about a high-octane team in the Edmonton Oilers. So I think that the buy-in has been very good. And the other thing, real quick, Dan, of note there, is when we talk about buy-in and playing well defensively and structurally, there's a certain discipline that goes into that. And this is a very disciplined team. And when I say discipline, I don't mean staying out of the penalty box. I mean discipline. They take to coaching. And this is where, you reference off the top of the show here, talking about the Capitals. There was talk in the offseason, an older team, literally one of the oldest rosters in the league. I think this is where the veteran savviness can be turned into an advantage. When you talk about a team sticking with a defensive structure, not cheating the game, buying in, again, taking to the coaching. I think there's a lot of elements that have gone into the strong play defensively. But when you talk about, guys like Marcus Johansson, Lars Eller, guys, again, north of 30 years old, maybe on the back nines of their careers, there has been that commitment to detail over the course of the past few weeks, which has been very noticeable and very commendable. Again, as far as something that could potentially translate. Well, now on top of that, if you get the additions, Backstrom, Wilson, etc., heck, you've got the foundation. You're going to have the skill.
All right, so after the break, we will continue to talk to Ben Raby. We'll talk about Alex Ovechkin's historic season. We'll talk about that next. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all of the fat and calories? Then you gotta try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays and I know my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. If you're like me and you want to eat healthier but don't want to compromise taste, then man, I've got the thing for you. You gotta try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious. You won't think they're good for you. Perfect for the New Year's resolution. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter, brownie, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is they are healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around for a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today. Walk to the pharmacy section and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar pack of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to Sam's Club, run and grab a 13-bar box and our hit flavor brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later.
Could be a very good combination.
So yeah, one of the tough things here, and it's a good leadership core. That's my big thing about this geriatric team is there's a lot of leaders. There's a lot of guys that have been there. They've done that. But their Capitals, if they're going to continue winning, they're going to have to do it without one of their key guys on the blue line and John Carlson. As we know, he took that puck to the face against Winnipeg. So there is players that have stepped up and stepped in. Erik Gustaffson, if you had picked Erik Gustaffson in the beginning of the season to be one of the stars of the blue line, you should really bet more money in Vegas because I never saw that coming. But he gets a hat trick in a game when he didn't have a goal the entire season. And then he had a goal the game after that. So chipping in offensively, but also defensively. You know, the one thing about John Carlson is he eats up a lot of minutes. So having Erik Gustaffson on this team is really what the doctor ordered.
Yeah, he's certainly stepped up. And, we were talking earlier about Sonny Milano and Charlie Lindgren. I mean, Erik Gustafson and Dylan Strome as well. When you consider the haul from the off season and into the start of this season that Brian McClellan has collected for this Capitals bunch, it seems anything he touches seems to turn into gold. They've all turned out very well so far. And yeah, Gustafson stepping up in the absence of John Carlson. Look, at the end of the day, there's going to be no way to replace John Carlson, and we'll see, just how sustainable some of the early, if you want to call it, success that they've managed without his services over the past, week plus couple of weeks here. I think the deeper we go into this, it certainly could be, there could be some tougher waters up ahead, if you will. But certainly in the short term here, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, Erik Gustafson among those who have stepped up and carried the load, carried big minutes and filled in admirably. And for Gustafson, I think that offensive upside has always been there. A 19-goal scorer going back a few years ago with Chicago. He's suffered a little bit over the past couple of years from lack of opportunity, lack of playing time, in his different stops. And I think here's a guy here in Washington who the more minutes he gets, seemingly taking advantage and feeding off of it. And, a good skater, not afraid to activate and join the rush. You look at those goals he scored over the past couple of weeks, several of them, below the face-off circles, not afraid to get in there. And, for the most part, not at the expense of his defensive play. He picks his spots wisely. And, certainly somebody, along with TVR, I think Trevor Van Riemsdyk's had a good stretch as well, who have, helped fill the void with 74 out.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be replacement by committee or in his absence, shall we say. So the big thing of this season, kind of the biggest thing, even bigger and above how the Capitals are playing, is Alex Ovechkin's career as he ties and then passes Gordie Howe. And, I talk about this a lot and people are like, yeah, that's great. You are witnessing history almost every time this guy is out on the ice. And we're seeing it in our lifetime. We're not looking at some archival footage of Gretzky or Gordie Howe. It's happening in our lifetime. And I don't want to ever get numb to that fact that I'm witnessing this every time he's out on the ice. Tell me your thoughts on Alex Ovechkin's just monumental season. It's not just the goal chase. It's every time I watch the game, Joe B and Locker talk about, well, he also did this milestone and this milestone. It just blows my mind every time I watch him play. For me, it's a lifetime coming to fruition of playing solid hockey his entire career.
Yeah, it's amazing what he continues to do now at age 37 in his 18th NHL season, more than 1,300 games. And again, a lot of miles on the hockey odometer. And as Barry Trotz used to like to say years ago, Alex Ovechkin does not play a quiet game. And there's a lot of wear and tear there. But that said, certainly few signs, if any, of a guy slowing down. And you look at the past few weeks, the past month, and it reminds me, Dan, a little bit of last fall, the start of last season. And what I mean by that is thinking back to last year, the Capitals were also without several headliners. They were dealing with the injury bug. They were missing several leaders. And Alex Ovechkin, did a lot of heavy lifting and, brought the Capitals, brought them into the fight, if you will, and lifted them up on nights where maybe they weren't at their best. And you look at the overtime loss against the Buffalo Sabres, the 2 goals that he scored. He had 7 shots on goal, 15 attempts. He was hitting, he was physical, he was engaged, he was dialed in. There really haven't been too many nights off for Ovechkin. And I think he's up to 15 goals in the last 13 games. But again, just the eye test. It's just that there's, the passion, the drive, it's all there. And I do think, Dan, that over the course of the past few weeks in December, those milestones and 800 goals and tying and passing Gordie Howe. There's a narrative. There was a question being asked, is this all a distraction around the team? And I actually think just the opposite. We felt it in December that it was actually a real motivation, a real kind of carrot for the team when they were going through that difficult travel itinerary I referenced minutes ago. Ovechkin is motivated and his teammates feed off of it. There's a real appreciation for what they're a part of, for the history that they're a part of. And I really think it was a boost to the team in December. And seemingly it has maybe served as a springboard for a big January, as Ovechkin didn't seem to miss a beat against the Buffalo Sabres. So no, he's just continuing to hit the benchmarks, the milestones, and unbelievably in his 18th year.
I mean, just here recently, Alex Ovechkin named the first star of the month. He's doing that with some elite company in the form of Connor McDavid and Tage Thompson. When he hit the 800 goal mark, he passed Gordie Howe, as we talked about. The 37-year-old also had 2 hat tricks and now has 30 total in his career, which moved him past Marcel Dion and Bobby Hull. And not only that, but Ovechkin also passed Ray Bourque for most shots in the NHL history. That's what I'm talking about. It's not just this one-dimensional thing. He is breaking records on multi-tiered levels here. Just really amazing. So one of the things that I get asked off, who do I think is the greatest goal scorer of all time? And of course, right now, it's Wayne Gretzky. He holds that record. But for me, it's Alex Ovechkin, and I'm not saying that because I have my Capitals colored glasses on. It's because he is doing it in an era where goal scoring is at an all-time low. You take into consideration the COVID years. You take into consideration the lockout seasons. And he's doing it when goaltenders are bigger, they're taller, they're in better shape. For me, it's a better litmus test of who he is as a hockey player and a goal scorer. If you take a look back on what Wayne Gretzky and Gordie Howe did it, they did it in an era where it wasn't the butterfly style. It was kind of just that flailing their legs after it. And, the goalies weren't nearly as well in shape. So the argument to be made right now is ultimately who is the best goal scorer?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think Gretzky holds it just in terms of numbers at this point. But as far as the ability to create the goals and all the challenges that you mentioned that Ovechkin has faced over the course of his career, the bigger goaltenders, the better goaltenders, and while there are certainly objectives league-wide and incentive league-wide to open things up and see a rise in goal scoring, it's of course not to the extent that it was in the 1980s. And I'll add to that list of what Ovechkin has had to deal with as far as, the better goaltending, et cetera. The fact that when you consider as well the coaching these days, right. Look at all the iPads and assistant coaches behind every bench and defensive systems. There was no 1-3-1. There was no neutral zone trap when Gretzky was playing back in the day. Right. And just the way players are coached these days defensively, for Ovechkin to break through, if you want to call that a barrier, just speaks to his greatness as a goal scorer and his ability to score during, what for the most part over his career has been, a challenge league-wide to find the back of the net. I will acknowledge, things are starting to open up a little bit more these past few years. We see a lot of the high-end skill being showcased and that type of thing. But for the most part over his career, you're bang on. It certainly doesn't compare to the rate at which goals were being scored league-wide in the 1980s, for example.
And, so the flip side of that coin is, of course, is if you look at the kind of hockey sticks that they used back then, primarily wood in the earliest stages of fiberglass. When Alex Ovechkin goes back for a slap shot, you see that arc of his stick go back. And, is that going to add some extra propulsion on that puck? You bet it's going to. So the question then and I know that there's not a really good answer, is that would Gretzky and Gordie Howe, would they have overcome in modern times and maybe even been better goal scorers? That is a question out there as well. You consider the small pads and everything that they had back in the day. It's just a really tough thing. Do you think Howe and Gretzky would have overcome in modern times?
Well, the amazing thing with Howe is, and this was brought to my attention weeks ago, chatting with former broadcaster, the Hall of Famer Chuck Caton, who called games of Gordie Howe's during his career. He brought it to my attention. Howe didn't even have a curve on his stick throughout his career. So just imagine that. He had a straight blade and he was scoring 801 times. But, certainly you're right. There have been advances in equipment for shooters, for goal scorers, certainly. But conversely, I mean, Howe was doing that for part of his career against goalies that didn't wear masks. So
Right.
the equipment upgrades, I would say, are universal and perhaps cancel each other out. But the fact that he did score north of 800 goals, Howe, doing so with a straight blade, certainly, my ears perked up when that was brought to my attention. I thought that was significant when you talk about the changes in equipment.
All right. I want to thank Ben Raby once again for joining us on this edition of Locked On Capitals. You can find Ben on the Caps This Morning podcast and, of course, on Capitals Radio. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On NHL Prospects, your daily podcast covering the next generation of hockey superstars leading up to the NHL draft. Locked On NHL Prospects, available on YouTube and wherever you find your podcast. So, once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.